The morning sun cast long shadows across the deck of the Coast Guard cutter as Sarah Martinez adjusted her gear one final time. At 28, she had spent nearly a decade perfecting her skills as a Navy diver, but today felt different. The rescue operation ahead would test every ounce of training she had received at the Naval Diving and Salvage Training Center in Panama City. The call had come in at dawn. A civilian helicopter carrying a family of 4 had gone down in the Kenai River during an unexpected early winter storm in Alaska. The water temperature hovered just above freezing, and time was running out. The Coast Guard had already deployed their rescue swimmers, but the helicopter had sunk to a depth that required specialized diving expertise. Sarah's commanding officer, Captain Williams, approached with the mission briefing. The helicopter had crashed in a particularly treacherous section of the river where the current was strongest. Ice floes from an early freeze were already beginning to form along the banks, making the rescue even more dangerous. "Martinez, you're our best deep-water specialist," Captain Williams said, his breath visible in the cold air. "The civilian rescue teams have been pulled back. The conditions are too dangerous for standard operations." Sarah nodded, checking her dry suit seals one more time. The neoprene material would provide some protection against the freezing water, but she knew that even with her training, hypothermia could set in quickly. Her breathing apparatus was rated for the depth they expected to find the helicopter, and her emergency ascent procedures had been drilled into her until they became second nature. The rescue boat moved into position above the crash site. Sonar had located the helicopter approximately 40 feet down, resting on its side against a large boulder. The current at that depth was unpredictable, and visibility would be nearly zero in the murky river water. Sarah's dive partner, Petty Officer Jackson, would remain on the surface as her safety coordinator. They had worked together on dozens of operations, and she trusted him completely to monitor her dive profile and manage the safety lines. "Remember, you have a maximum of 20 minutes at that depth before decompression becomes a factor," Jackson reminded her as she prepared to enter the water. "The water temperature will cut that time even shorter if your suit integrity is compromised." Sarah performed her final equipment check. Her underwater cutting tools were secured to her belt, along with emergency flotation devices for any survivors she might find. The hardest part about these rescue dives was maintaining hope while preparing for the worst. The first shock of entering the water took her breath away despite her thermal protection. The Kenai River was fed by glacial runoff, and even her extensive cold water training hadn't fully prepared her for the bone-deep chill that immediately began penetrating her gear. She descended slowly, following the safety line that Jackson fed out from above. The murky water reduced visibility to less than 3 feet, forcing her to rely primarily on her sense of touch to navigate. Her dive computer showed the water temperature at 34 degrees Fahrenheit, just 2 degrees above freezing. At 20 feet down, the current became noticeably stronger. Sarah had to use her fins constantly to maintain position as she descended further. The sound of her breathing through the regulator seemed amplified in the underwater silence, punctuated only by the distant rumble of water flowing over rocks upstream. When she reached 35 feet, her searching hands finally made contact with metal. The helicopter lay on its side, the passenger compartment partially crushed but still intact. Sarah worked her way around the aircraft, looking for the best entry point while fighting against the current that seemed determined to push her away from the wreckage. The pilot's door was jammed shut, but she could see inside through the cracked windscreen. Her heart sank as she observed the pilot, clearly unconscious and possibly worse. But her training kicked in immediately. She had to check for signs of life and determine if there was any possibility of rescue. Sarah managed to force open the rear passenger door after several minutes of work with her prying tools. The helicopter's cabin was partially flooded, but there was still an air pocket trapped in the upper section. Her underwater flashlight illuminated the interior, revealing 2 adult passengers and what appeared to be a child in the back seat. Moving carefully in the confined space, she checked each person for signs of life. The adults showed no pulse or breathing, but when she reached the child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, she detected a weak pulse. The girl was unconscious but alive, trapped in her seat by the twisted metal of the crash. Sarah immediately activated her emergency surface communication device. "Jackson, I have one survivor, juvenile female, unconscious but alive. I need the cutting equipment lowered immediately. The extraction is going to be complicated. The response crackled through her underwater communication system. Copy that, Martinez. Cutting equipment coming down now. Be advised whether conditions are deteriorating topside. We may have a narrow window for extraction. As Sarah worked to free the child from the wreckage, she began to notice the first signs of cold affecting her performance. Her fingers were becoming less nimble despite the insulated gloves, and she had to concentrate harder to perform tasks that would normally be automatic. The cutting work was painstaking. She had to be extremely careful not to cause further injury to the unconscious girl while removing the twisted metal that pinned her in place. Each cut had to be precise, and the underwater environment made every movement more difficult. After 15 minutes at depth, Sarah finally managed to free the child. But now she faced the most challenging part of the rescue. She had to get both herself and an unconscious person to the surface safely while fighting against the current and her own increasing hypothermia. She inflated the emergency flotation device and secured it around the child, then began the careful ascent. The safety protocols she had learned demanded a slow, controlled rise to avoid decompression issues, but the girl's condition meant that every second counted. Halfway to the surface, disaster struck. A sudden increase in the river current caught Sarah off guard, slamming both her and the child against a submerged log. The impact tore her safety line and damaged her buoyancy compensator. Worse, she felt the cold water beginning to seep into her dry suit through a tear she couldn't see but could definitely feel. Now Sarah was in serious trouble. She was effectively cut off from surface support, her thermal protection was compromised, and she still had an unconscious child to rescue. Her training had prepared her for equipment failures, but not all at once in these conditions. Fighting against panic, Sarah made a critical decision. She would use her remaining buoyancy to get the child to the surface first, even if it meant she might not have enough left for her own safe ascent. The girl's flotation device was working properly, and if Sarah could get her high enough, the rescue team might be able to reach her. With her fingers now seriously affected by the cold, Sarah struggled to adjust the child's flotation device for maximum lift. The procedure that should have taken 30 seconds stretched to over 2 minutes as she fought against the numbing effects of hypothermia. Finally, she managed to send the child upward toward the rescue team. Through her fatting underwater communication, she heard Jackson's voice confirming that they had the girl and were beginning emergency medical treatment. But Sarah's own situation was becoming desperate. The cold water that had entered her suit was rapidly draining her core body temperature. Her movements were becoming sluggish, and she could feel the early stages of hypothermia affecting her judgment and coordination. She attempted to ascend using her remaining equipment, but without the safety line and with her damaged buoyancy compensator, progress was slow and difficult. The current continued to push her away from the rescue boat above, and her underwater communication system had finally failed completely. As Sarah struggled toward the surface, she realized that her years of training were about to face their ultimate test. She was alone, hypothermic, and running out of air in one of the most challenging rescue environments imaginable. The very skills that had made her the Navy's choice for this mission would now determine whether she survived to tell the story. Sarah's ascent became a battle against her own body as much as the river conditions. The hypothermia was progressing faster than she had anticipated, and her motor functions were deteriorating with each passing moment. Her regulator felt heavy in her mouth, and she had to concentrate consciously on maintaining her breathing rhythm. At 20 feet below the surface, she encountered a new challenge. Ice crystals were beginning to form in her breathing apparatus, a dangerous condition that could block her air supply completely. Sarah knew she had to reach the surface soon or risk losing consciousness underwater. Her training at the Naval Diving and Salvage Training Center had included extensive work on emergency ascent procedures, but those exercises had been conducted in controlled environments with safety divers standing by. Here, she was completely on her own, fighting against conditions that would challenge even the most experienced commercial divers. The current had pushed her nearly 100 yards downstream from the rescue boat. Through the murky water above, she could barely make out the hull of the Coast Guard vessel, but it seemed impossibly far away. Her damaged buoyancy compensator was providing minimal lift, forcing her to rely primarily on her own swimming ability to reach the surface. Sarah's wetsuit thermometer showed the water temperature had dropped another degree, and ice was beginning to form on the river's surface above her. The rescue window was closing rapidly as weather conditions deteriorated beyond the Coast Guard's operational limits. With tremendous effort, she managed to break the surface about 70 yards from the rescue vessel. The shock of the air temperature, which was even colder than the water, hit her immediately. Her exposed face began to freeze almost instantly, and ice crystals formed on her mask and regulator. She could hear the rescue team shouting to her from the boat, but their voices seemed distant and unclear. The hypothermia was affecting her hearing and cognitive function, making it difficult to understand their instructions or coordinate her own rescue. Jackson's voice carried across the water, directing her to swim toward a rescue line they were deploying. But Sarah's arms and legs were responding sluggishly to her commands, and the current was still pushing her away from safety. Captain Williams had made the difficult decision to risk extending the rescue operation beyond normal safety parameters. The weather window was closing, but they couldn't abandon one of their own divers. However, launching another rescue swimmer in these conditions would put additional lives at risk. Sarah managed to grab the rescue line on her second attempt, but her grip strength was so reduced by the cold that she couldn't maintain her hold. The rope slipped through her numb fingers, and she began to drift further downstream. The rescue team quickly deployed a backup plan. Using the ship's small, inflatable boat, 2 crew members attempted to reach Sarah's position. But the ice floes that had been forming along the riverbank were now creating obstacles in the water, making navigation treacherous. As Sarah floated in the freezing water, she began to experience the mental effects of severe hypothermia. Her thoughts became confused, and she started to feel an overwhelming urge to remove her remaining protective equipment. This paradoxical undressing response was a dangerous sign that her core body temperature had dropped to critical levels. Fighting against her own instincts, Sarah forced herself to keep her gear in place and continue trying to reach the rescue boat. Her Navy training included psychological preparation for extreme situations, and she drew on those mental exercises to maintain focus despite her deteriorating condition. The inflatable rescue boat finally reached her position after what felt like hours, but had actually been only minutes. The crew members immediately recognized the signs of severe hypothermia and knew they had to get Sarah out of the water immediately. However, extracting a hypothermic person from water requires careful handling. Sudden movements or changes in position can cause cardiac arrest as cold blood from the extremities returns to the heart. The rescue team had to balance the need for speed with the medical requirements for safe extraction. Petty Officer Jackson coordinated the rescue from the main vessel while the boat crew carefully lifted Sarah from the water. Her speech was slurred and confused, and she was showing signs of moderate hypothermia that could quickly progress to life-threatening levels. The medical corpsmen aboard the rescue vessel immediately began rewarming procedures. Sarah was placed in a warming blanket system and given heated oxygen to breathe. Her core body temperature had dropped to just over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, dangerously close to the level where cardiac complications typically occur. As the rescue boat raced toward the nearest medical facility, Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness. The warming process had to be gradual to avoid shocking her system, but time was still critical. The medical team monitored her heart rhythm constantly, watching for the irregular patterns that often accompany severe hypothermia. During her brief periods of consciousness, Sarah's first question was always about the child she had rescued. The medical team assured her that the girl had been successfully resuscitated and was receiving treatment at the regional hospital. Sarah's quick action in freeing her from the wreckage and getting her to the surface had saved the child's life. The helicopter pilot and the 2 adult passengers had not survived the crash, but Sarah's rescue of the child meant that one family would not be completely destroyed by the tragedy. The 8-year-old girl, whose name was Emma, had suffered from hypothermia and near drowning, but was expected to make a full recovery. As Sarah's body temperature slowly returned to normal levels, she began to reflect on the rescue operation. The mission had pushed her training and equipment to their absolute limits, and several factors had nearly resulted in her own death. The early ice formation, equipment failure, and extreme water temperature had created a perfect storm of dangerous conditions. Captain Williams visited Sarah in the medical facility once she was stable. He commended her for the successful rescue, but also wanted to conduct a thorough debrief of the operation to identify lessons learned for future missions. "Martinez, you saved that child's life," the captain said. "But you also took risks that went beyond acceptable parameters. We need to understand what happened down there and how we can better prepare for similar conditions." Sarah appreciated the captain's direct approach. The Navy's culture emphasized learning from both successes and failures, and she knew that her experience would be valuable for training future rescue divers. The equipment failures she had experienced were particularly important to analyze and address. The investigation revealed that the extreme cold had affected several pieces of equipment in ways that hadn't been anticipated during testing. Sarah's dry suit had developed a small tier that allowed water entry, but the real problem was that the sealing systems weren't designed for the specific conditions they encountered in the glacial river. Her buoyancy compensator had malfunctioned due to ice formation in the inflation valve, a problem that could potentially affect other divers in similar conditions. The underwater communication system had failed because the batteries couldn't maintain proper voltage in the extreme cold. These technical issues, combined with the unpredictable river current and deteriorating weather conditions, had created a scenario that went well beyond the standard rescue protocols. Sarah's survival had depended as much on luck and determination as on her training and equipment. The rescue operation became a case study at the Naval Diving and Salvage Training Center. Sarah's experience led to improvements in cold water diving equipment and procedures that would benefit future rescue operations in extreme environments. Most importantly, the rescue had demonstrated that even the most experienced and well-trained divers could find themselves in situations where survival depended on quick thinking and the ability to adapt when everything went wrong. Sarah's Navy training had given her the foundation to survive, but her personal determination had made the difference between life and death. The child she rescued, Emma, made a complete recovery and was eventually reunited with her extended family. The tragedy had claimed 3 lives, but Sarah's actions had prevented it from becoming an even greater loss. For Sarah, knowing that her efforts had saved 1 life made all the risks and hardships of the rescue worthwhile. The incident also highlighted the importance of rescue diving teams and the specialized training required for operations in extreme environments. Sarah's experience would influence diving safety protocols and equipment design for years to come, potentially saving the lives of future rescue divers and the people they were trying to help. 3 months after the Kenai River rescue, Sarah Martinez stood before a panel of Navy officials and civilian rescue specialists at the Naval Diving and Salvage Training Center. The formal investigation into the operation was concluding, and she was presenting her final testimony about the equipment failures and procedural challenges she had encountered. The panel had spent weeks analyzing every aspect of the rescue, from the initial decision to deploy a Navy diver in such extreme conditions to the equipment modifications that would be necessary for future operations. Sarah's detailed account of the underwater rescue had become the foundation for new training protocols and equipment specifications. Admiral Richardson, who headed the investigation panel, addressed Sarah directly. "Petty Officer Martinez, your actions during this rescue operation demonstrated exceptional skill and judgment under the most challenging conditions. However, we also need to address the systemic issues that nearly cost us one of our best divers." The investigation had revealed several critical areas where existing procedures and equipment had failed to meet the demands of extreme cold water rescue operations. The dry suit technology that had served well in temperate waters needed significant modification for glacial river conditions. The underwater communication systems required battery improvements and better cold weather sealing. Sarah had worked closely with the engineering teams to test new equipment designs based on her experience. She participated in controlled cold water tests where technicians could safely evaluate the performance of modified gear under conditions similar to those she had faced in Alaska. The new dry suit designs included redundant sealing systems and improved thermal insulation. The buoyancy compensators were redesigned with ice-resistant inflation valves and backup systems that could function even if the primary system failed. Most importantly, the underwater communication equipment was upgraded with cold weather batteries and improved signal processing. During the testing phase, Sarah discovered that her own physical conditioning had played a crucial role in her survival. The months of specialized training she had before becoming a Navy diver had built up her tolerance for cold water and her ability to function under stress. However, even that conditioning had limits that needed to be better understood and respected. The medical analysis of her hypothermia case revealed that she had come much closer to serious complications than anyone had realized at the time. Her core body temperature had dropped to levels where cardiac arrest was a significant risk, and the gradual rewarming process had been essential to her recovery. The Navy's chief diving medicine specialist, explained the physiological challenges that Sarah had faced. The human body's response to extreme cold water is complex and can be unpredictable. Even with the best training and equipment, there are limits to what any diver can safely endure. The medical team recommended new monitoring protocols for cold water diving operations. Future missions would include more sophisticated temperature monitoring equipment and clearer guidelines for when divers should be extracted regardless of mission status. Sarah's experience also led to changes in the decision-making process for deploying Navy divers in civilian rescue operations. The Coast Guard and Navy developed new joint protocols that would ensure better coordination and more realistic assessment of environmental risks before committing divers to dangerous operations. Captain Williams, who had made the original decision to send Sarah on the rescue mission, participated in developing these new protocols. He acknowledged that the urgency of the rescue situation had led to accepting risks that might not have been justified under normal circumstances. We had to balance the certainty of losing the crash victims against the possibility of losing our rescue diver, Captain Williams explained to the investigation panel. Sarah's training and experience made her our best option, but we should have had better procedures for evaluating and managing the environmental risks. The case study that emerged from Sarah's rescue became required reading for all Navy rescue divers. It illustrated both the capabilities and limitations of current training and equipment, and it provided valuable lessons about decision-making under extreme pressure. Sarah herself returned to active diving duty after completing her recovery and participating in the investigation. However, the experience had changed her perspective on risk assessment and safety procedures. She became an advocate for more rigorous environmental evaluation before diving operations and better communication between divers and surface support teams. 6 months after the rescue, Sarah received a letter from Emma's grandmother, thanking her for saving the child's life. Emma had not only recovered fully from her hypothermia and near drowning, but had developed a strong interest in water safety and rescue operations. The 8-year-old had started taking swimming lessons and often talked about wanting to help people the way Sarah had helped her. The letter included a drawing that Emma had made showing a diver underwater near a helicopter. The child's artistic interpretation of her rescue was surprisingly detailed, and it reminded Sarah of why she had chosen to become a Navy diver in the first place. The ability to save lives in situations where others couldn't help made all the risks and challenges worthwhile. Sarah framed the letter and drawing, displaying them in her quarters as a reminder of the human impact of rescue operations. The technical aspects of diving and the equipment improvements were important, but ultimately the mission was about preserving human life and reuniting families. The equipment modifications developed as a result of Sarah's experience were eventually adopted throughout the Navy's diving program. The improved cold weather gear enabled successful rescue operations in conditions that would have been considered too dangerous under the previous standards. 2 years later, another Navy diver successfully rescued 3 people from a vehicle that had broken through ice on a frozen lake in Minnesota. The diver was equipped with the new cold weather gear and followed the updated protocols that had been developed based on Sarah's Kenai River experience. The rescue was completed without injury to the diver or complications from equipment failure. Sarah, now promoted to Chief Petty Officer, served as a consultant on that operation, providing advice based on her experience with extreme cold water rescues. Her expertise had become a valuable resource for planning and executing similar missions. The incident also led to improved cooperation between military and civilian rescue organizations. The lessons learned from Sarah's experience were shared with Coast Guard rescue swimmers, civilian dive teams, and emergency responders across the country. This knowledge sharing helped save lives far beyond the Navy's immediate sphere of operation. Looking back on the rescue, Sarah recognized that success had depended on a combination of training, equipment, luck, and determination. No single factor would have been sufficient to ensure both her survival and the successful rescue of the child. The experience reinforced her belief in the importance of thorough preparation, while acknowledging that real-world operations often presented challenges that couldn't be fully anticipated. The story of Sarah's rescue in the Kenai River became more than just a case study in extreme diving operations. It demonstrated the dedication and professionalism of military rescue personnel and highlighted the continuous effort to improve safety and effectiveness in life-saving operations. Emma, now 10 years old, remained in contact with Sarah through occasional letters and holiday cards. The child's recovery had been complete, and she had developed into a confident swimmer who often helped teach younger children water safety. In many ways, her positive response to the trauma of the helicopter crash reflected the successful outcome of Sarah's dangerous rescue mission. For Sarah, the knowledge that her actions had given Emma the chance to grow up and pursue her own dreams provided lasting satisfaction. The risks she had taken and the challenges she had overcome were vindicated by the life she had saved and the improvements in rescue capabilities that had resulted from her experience. The Kenai River rescue remained one of the most challenging operations in Sarah's career, but it also represented everything she valued about being a Navy diver. When people needed help in situations where others couldn't reach them, she and her fellow divers were trained and equipped to respond. The constant work to improve their capabilities ensured that future rescues would be safer and more successful, protecting both the people being rescued and the divers who risked their lives to help others.